best actors today, and must have a lot of influence in Hollywood, I believe. Now, what have you done to fight, the damage that actual social abuses is doing to Americans? Is your best weapon that I can say is film?
Okay, the question is, I'm a good actress. What have I done to try to correct the abuses in America today? The best weapon this man feels is through films. I think films are very important, television even more so, because it reaches more people than films. You're talking about an industry that is controlled by the highest paid corporate executives of all. And although they're highly paid, they also lose their jobs real quick if they bring in movies that don't turn a profit. And for example, Paramount is a subsidiary of Gulf and Western. Gulf and Western controls the economy of the Dominican Republic, owned a lot of the oil shelves off the coast of Vietnam. These corporate managers are the people that determine what movies Paramount is going to make. So it's not that easy to make movies that are very direct in their political message. Also, because of the kind of what we're used to culturally, we're not a people who go to those kind of movies. Ho-hum, it's boring. I get bored. So you have to find people who know how to say something in a way that is also entertaining and doesn't come on too hard. It's difficult. I've made a few movies lately that I think speak to various issues. I think Julia, because it's about brave and committed people, one of whom actually gave her life for justice, and it's a true story, I think it makes people feel good somehow, even though it's a tragedy. I've made another movie about Vietnam veterans and how they got screwed over when they came back. And I'm making a movie in January that's about nuclear energy and the problems of that and corporate cover-ups. And I've made a few, and I do that too, but I'm interested in organization. I don't think you can do anything. No one has ever accomplished anything without organization. The evils that I've talked about have their roots very deeply planted in American soil, and they're not going to go away through evolutionary processes. They are not going to go away until we create a strong enough power base to be able to be a real threat, until we can, for example, get people elected into office who have no interest in their own power or profit, people who have proven themselves on the firing line, in the streets, in demonstrations, etc. The Cesar Chavez's, the Naders, the Martin Luther King types, people like my husband, people who because they've stood up to so much already that they're not going to be bulldozed by the CIA, the FBI, or big business. You start getting those people into positions of power, but backed by massive popular movements, then you're talking about beginning something. And movies can only do so much. You have to infiltrate the mass media, to use a kind of an icky term. You have to begin to make the mass media responsible and treat audiences like they're intelligent, but you also have to try to reach people much more directly. Yes? Discrimination against women, wages are lower for women, unemployment is higher for women and minorities. Do we think that the kind of things I've talked about are sufficient to do away with discrimination? They are the only thing that will do away with discrimination. Women alone, just like blacks alone, Puerto Ricans alone, cannot be a powerful enough force to restructure the American economy. And until that happens, you're not going to see very much token change, but not any real change about who gets hired. You're not going to see any lessening of unemployment. And as long as there is high unemployment, women will always suffer more, minorities will always suffer more.
Do you think once there are these reforms that women will be equal participants in promotions and power?
I think that the process sort of goes like this. There's a women's movement that deals with women's issues, that has to develop and flourish alongside a greater movement that combines all people, that will address the root issues of the economy. When we begin to create and achieve economic democracy, women will be there. They will have experiences, and as leaders, they will have proven themselves already in a lot of areas, and they can, make demands within a context that doesn't need to discriminate. See, most discrimination is to the benefit of the establishment to have unemployment. It means that workers can be manipulated if there's a large unused labor pool. If women can be pitted against men, etc., then management has much more power over those who are working for them. If you do away with that kind of power, you do away with the need for discrimination. You do away with the job insecurity that gives rise to racism, for example. Yeah.
Excuse me. Can we just have one more question, please?
Why?
Because we have to cut it off at 20 after.
Oh,
Okay.
but it's only 10 after. I'll answer quick. What do we think of President Carter? No matter what you may think at different times, just remember one thing. Better to have Carter there than Nixon or Ford. Better. For a number of reasons. At last, the central issues are at least being discussed instead of swept under the rug. At least there are some people, like Ambassador Andrew Young, who is representing this country on an international level. And who would have thought 5-6 years ago that a man who marched in the street and was beaten by the racists in the South and walked next to Martin Luther King, that he would be our UN ambassador, or that Coretta King would be a UN delegate from the United States? That's very important. These things should not be overlooked. I think that Carter's criticisms of the oil company were right on. And although I have criticisms of Carter, I think that it's wonderful that he is taking on these criminal giants that are screwing the American people. And, if you don't think that they are, these gas and oil companies, see if you can find any real proof that there was a gas shortage. Go to New Mexico and Texas, where British Petroleum is finding unlimited amounts of natural gas at the same time that our big natural gas suppliers say they can't find any because they're waiting for deregulation of natural gas so the price will go up and their profits will rise while old people are freezing to death in the cities of the East. And I take my hat off to Carter for that. And I take my hat off to him for at least trying to develop a comprehensive energy program. I don't agree with it, but I think you have to begin to address the problem and structure some overall solution to it.
Ms. Fonda, back to the corporations and the job market. I was wondering if you feel that big corporations fear the new aware college graduate, and that they're setting up the job market and everything to discourage this in order, in other words, for you to reform and sort of compromise your beliefs.
Did everyone hear the question? Yeah, I'll have to be honest. I think that anyone here that wants to go to work for a corporation would be heavily scrutinized. If there have been demonstrations and people partook of them, that would be in your dossier, in your file. I think that there's a tremendous pressure on young people to toe the line, to be conservative. I think a lot of the conservatism simply comes, though, from fear of not getting a job. In the 60s, you could drop out of school, work with the movement for a couple of years, go back to school, graduate, and get a job. The economy was very different than it is today. So it's not that the people were necessarily better or worse. It was just easier to be an activist than it is today. But I think that the corporations are terrified of your potential. They are very, very frightened. They can, it is not that they are operating like they did 10 years ago. There is much more, as I cited in the beginning with the Harris poll, there is much more public awareness of crime of big business. There is a tremendous amount of public lack of trust. There is fear on the part of these corporations that people will expose them even more. Last March, for example, our organization, the Campaign for Economic Democracy, had a conference in Santa Barbara. There were a couple of thousand people from around California, and we discussed the kind of things that we're talking about today. We discovered 2 weeks later that a spy from the Bank of America had been there. We discovered it because, again, a secretary who found a memo that was circulating among the managers of the Bank of America gave us the memo, a secret memo. And the memo, yay for secretaries, and night watchmen and the like. The memo said such things as, this organization should be tracked and monitored. They concentrated the most on talking about, this answers another point that was made over there. The thing they were the most frightened of was the concept of public members on the board of directors forcing public disclosures of the transactions of a corporations and federal chartering. That freaked them out. And they called on everyone in the Bank of America to take close heed to see if, as an organization, we survived the year we were someone to be afraid of.
What you say is true.
Can we cut it off there? We're pressed for time.
Corporate fear of students, grassroots movements, and then we talk about the 60s and the late 60s, charity movement, people like your husband. They're catching a lot of headlines and made a lot of people aware, either for good or bad. Now, today, 10 years later, with the exception of your husband, I think most of these people have been effectively silenced. And my question is, given the Fortune 500 and their undeniable power, what is to keep them from silencing the majority, silencing, except for a few that they can have as so-called, I don't know, 18th term, let's say, what they call black at the door. What is to keep them from silencing everyone?
The balances of forces, contrary to the impression that I might have created or that you might have, is shifting. And that is because of Watergate, it's because of the exposures of the bribes, it's because of the ending of the war, it's because of a lot of things. They are on shaky ground. It remains for a big movement to create the earthquake underneath that is going to force them to reevaluate. People will always be silenced. You know, there will always be people whose lives are ruined and destroyed, just as there was in the 50s. But our chances for overcoming that today are even greater than they were in the 60s, because, as I said at the beginning, and it's so important to realize, those people that were written off as silent majority, middle Americans, are with us. They are hurting. Your parents, people who worked their whole lives to be able to own their own home and to send you to college with the belief that if you graduated, you'd do better than they did. Middle-class Americans, the dream, the 2 cars in the garage, the owning things, the not having to constantly live in fear. These people are seeing the bottom drop out. Small businessmen are going broke, small farmers are going broke, your futures are in big question, and they're angry, and they're confused, and they are listening to alternatives. This was not true 5 years ago. It was not true 6 years ago. So what it means is that although the issues are not so clear, although we're in a kind of a period of transition from one crisis to another, that it's a time to deepen your understanding of the problems, to begin to find ways of talking to people who are suspicious in ways that won't turn them off, of keeping your ears and eyes out and open to what's going on in your area that you could relate to that's addressing these problems. It means understanding that there are a few people, there's, you know, it's like movements, there's always a core of people who are prepared to give up a lot. There's a few. And then there's the massive numbers of people, if there's enough of them, they're not going to be able to silence everybody. They never have. And look at all the violence that was used against the labor movement, against all of the other major social movements in the United States. They just never did. I've been told I have to go. Just a couple of books. There's a Ralph Nader book called The Taming of the Giant Corporations that's very, very helpful. There's another book, wonderful, funny, interesting book to read called Eat Your Heart Out by Jim Hightower. It's about the takeover of our food and drug industries. There's another book about industrial violence, would be particularly interesting for you who live here. It's called Muscle and Blood by Rachel Scott. And then there's a biggie, fascinating, real thick, but real good, called Global Reach, one of whose authors is Richard Barnett. These are some books that have helped me and a lot of other people to sort of have an overview. If you have time, see if you can read them. Thank you very much for being so attentive.